Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, Blaster here. Today we have a format on the menu that's a bit unusual for the channel. As you may know, very soon the 5th installment of the famous Europa Universalis franchise is coming out. I have been eagerly waiting for this game, but while we wait, I decided to take a trip down memory lane and squeeze in one last campaign in the 4th game. Despite being released all the way back in 2013, it hasn't lost its charm. Much of this is thanks to the massive list of DLCs, whose prices can make even the most dedicated strategy fans ice water. But luckily, Paradox offers a relatively budget-friendly subscription that gives access to the entire library of expansions. That's what we will be using for today's game. Back in the day, I played quite a few campaigns as Poland-Lithuania and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in attempts to achieve world domination, but this time my sights are set on Russia. Muscovy, as a starting nation, is one of the strongest in EU4, and our goals are equally grand. We'll aim to reach the borders of the Russian Empire at its peak, and maybe even go beyond, becoming the world's hegemon. This will be my first campaign as Muscovy, so naturally a few mistakes are bound to happen, but it is what it is. Without further interruption, let's get started. And so we begin our campaign not in the worst of all positions, yet still surrounded by danger on all sides. To the north lies our direct rival for dominance over the lands of the once great Kievan Rus, the Novgorod Republic. To the west, another formidable opponent, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which already holds sway over the lands of Ruthenians and Lithuans, in today's terms Ukrainians and Belarusians. And to the south and southeast, though weakened, still lingers the Great Horde, draining tribute from us and naturally marked as one of our top priorities for destruction. Our very first step toward greater glory will be Novgorod, against whom we conveniently already have a claim. Wasting no time, Prince marches his troops to the border, preparing for a swift and decisive strike. War is declared. Moscow armies surge deep into the Republic, laying siege to Novgorod itself. With no fortresses guarding the rest of the lands, the forces of the Grand Prince and his vassals sweep through the provinces like wildfire, seizing territory one after another. Sensing our overwhelming strength, the Novgorodians avoid direct confrontation, all the better for us. But just as war was nearing its natural conclusion, an unpleasant incident struck. Dmitry, the cousin of Grand Prince Vasily II, staged a coup and seized the throne. Vasily himself was forced into exile, a blow that shook the stability of the realm. Yet the new prince proved to be an excellent administrator, and under his rule Moscow was finally able to rally its army and lay down permanent claims on the neighboring Russian lands. A few months later, Novgorod finally fell, and not long after so did Luki. The Novgorod Republic was brought to its knees. Soon enough, Moscow received a peace offer with significant territorial concessions, including Novgorod itself, as well as long-awaited access to the Baltic Sea. Without much hesitation, the Grand Prince of Moscow accepted this generous proposal. With peace secured, the prince turned his focus to post-war recovery, replenishing the treasury, repaying debts, integrating the newly acquired lands, and restoring his war bands with fresh recruits. After several years on the throne, Dmitry managed to solidify his power and push Vasily II entirely out of the line of succession. The time of troubles was drawing to an end. In 1451, seeking to establish control over Tver, Grand Prince Dmitry launched yet another campaign. The Principality of Tver was allied with Tula. Still, neither posed much of a threat. Neither Tula nor Tver possessed the strength to stand against Moscow. The war progressed favorably, but on January the 12th, 1452, tragedy struck. Grand Prince Dmitry passed away. His place, however, was immediately taken by his no less gifted son, Ivan III. The war pressed on.
and by the end of 1452, both principalities were fully subdued. Moscow dictated the terms of peace. The Principality of Tula was stripped of Tula itself and Ryazan, while Tver was reduced to a vassal state under Moscow's authority. Until 1460, Moscow remained at peace, focused on rebuilding its army and economy. But on the 17th of June 1460, Sweden called upon the Grand Prince for aid in its struggle to break free from Denmark. Alongside Moscow, many kingdoms of Europe rallied to Sweden's cause. The war was not expected to be difficult, and the Grand Prince dispatched his warbands to support the Swedes. Four and a half years later, the Danish kingdom stood on the brink of collapse, and the Grand Prince seized the moment to strike at Novgorod once again. In January 1465, Moscow declared a new war on Novgorod. The battered remnants of the Republic stood no chance. By June 1465, Sweden had at last secured its independence and became our ally. And by the autumn of 1466, Novgorod was forced to cede several provinces and pay a one-time indemnity. Moscow's power was growing, strengthened by new alliances. The conquest of fresh lands allowed for investment in the development of the city of Novgorod, which truly rose to become the second great center of the principality. 4 years later, in 1470, having at last gathered enough strength, the Grand Prince turned his gaze eastward, towards the Kazan Khanate, a fragment of the once mighty Golden Horde. The prince's seasoned warbands left the Tatar armies no chance. Battle after battle, Moscow pressed closer to its long-awaited victory. And on February the 5th, 1476, peace was concluded. The entire northern part of the Kazan Khanate, including Kazan itself, was ceded to Moscow. Another period of peace began, but it would not last long. For centuries, Moscow had suffered under the Tatar Mongol yoke, forced to pay tribute to the Great Horde. But by 1476, Moscow had grown strong enough to declare, enough was enough, the Russian people would no longer bow to foreign rulers. War was declared once more. The prince's armies met virtually no resistance. Already in June 1477, the Horde's capital, Sarai, was taken. The Tatar-Mongol yoke had come to its end. Numerical and qualitative superiority was firmly on Moscow's side. While the Grand Prince's warbands ravaged the lands of the Great Horde and its vassals, the Great Khan himself marched on Moscow and laid it under siege. Yet the Grand Prince did not falter, he chose to fight. Reinforcements arrived and a deadly clash ensued. In April 1479 the battle was won, the siege of Moscow lifted, and the bold final stroke was placed upon the war. The northern territories of the Horde passed into Moscow's hands by treaty. No sooner had the widows wept for their fallen husbands than the Grand Prince once again summoned his warbands, this time for the final settlement of the Novgorod question. There was no time to lose, for Sweden too was casting its eyes upon Russian lands. The race for the last remnants of Novgorod had begun. In March 1483, the Novgorod Republic ceased to exist. The Swedes, however, managed to seize several Karelian provinces. Clearly, such a state of affairs would sooner or later lead to conflict. Yet for the time being, Moscow chose to maintain this fragile alliance in order to face greater threats elsewhere. Already in the following year, 1484, the Grand Prince resolved to strengthen Moscow's influence in the Baltic by seizing the territories of the Livonian Order. Weakened by its recent wars with Poland, the Order proved to be easy prey for the Muscovite state. In May 1486, its entire territory was annexed, the Livonian Order ceased to exist, and Moscow secured its growing power in the Baltic. In February 1491, the Renaissance finally took root in the lands of Moscow, greatly accelerating the country's development. For the next 3 years, the realm lived in peace. But at the dawn of 1494, the Grand Prince once again called his banners to war, this time against the Nogay horde. In recent years, the Nogays had taken advantage of the Kazan's weakness after its defeat by Moscow and seized lands that by right belonged to Rus. Such a blatant injustice had to be corrected without delay. The Nogay forces were inferior to those of the Grand Prince, both in numbers and in quality. Within a single year, his warbands shattered all resistance, and by 1499, an agreement was reached that restored historical justice. Moscow now strode confidently into the new century, yet many conquests still lay ahead. The victory over the Nogays lifted the spirits of the entire principality. Riding this wave of success, the Grand Prince resolved to launch a new campaign against the Uzbek Khanate, yet another remnant of the Golden Horde, and the last major obstacle on Moscow's path to expansion into Siberia and beyond that, the Far East. The Uzbeks were allied with the Great Horde, but this only played into the prince's hands, for the lands of the Horde were also among Moscow's ambitions. In 1501, war once again erupted. Battle after battle ended in Moscow's favor. By 1504, nearly all the territory of the Great Horde had been seized. The Khan of the Horde sued for peace unilaterally, ceding his northern provinces to Moscow, a deal that suited the Grand Prince well. 1-4 was now removed from the board. And in 1509 the Uzbeks themselves hastily capitulated before the might of Moscow's armies. By 1510 the last stronghold of the Kazan Khanate had fallen as well. 2 years later, Grand Prince Vasily III turned his attention to the final settlement of the Nogay question. Drained by a decade of unending wars, the Nogays were easy prey. Yet Vasily would not live to see the history. His place was taken by his exceptionally gifted young son, Ivan. Under this new ruler, the Muscovite state was destined for great achievements. Already the following year, Ivan concluded the war with the annexation of new lands. For a time, peace reigned at last in the east. But Ivan IV, being both a skilled strategist and a shrewd diplomat, in 1518 resolved, after securing Denmark's support, to strike against the newly formed Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Opposing him, however, stood Sweden, with whom Moscow had recently fallen out over clashing territorial claims. It was a perilous gamble, for the balance of power between the two sides was nearly equal. To make matters worse, England, the defender of the Catholic faith, took the Commonwealth's side. Ivan, however, counted on England being preoccupied with its recently begun war against the Ottomans. One way or another, it was clear, victory in this war would bring immense gains, but defeat could mark the beginning of the end for the realm. Seizing the advantage of surprise, Moscow's armies surged deep into the Commonwealth's lands. Thus began the great 10-year campaign to the west. After 5 years of fierce clashes, Denmark was completely defeated and forced to abandon Ivan in his struggle for the reunification of the Slavic peoples. Soon after, Sweden, having lost countless men, also agreed to avoid peace with Moscow. Ivan gladly accepted the Swedes' proposal. In the following years, the Muscovites won battle after battle, crushing the armies of the enemies. By 1525, the King of England finally recognized the futility of waging war against Moscow and agreed to avoid peace. This left the blood-soaked Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth alone to face the might of the Muscovite host. The outcome of the war was now all but decided. After a few more battles and sieges, the Commonwealth's king at last agreed to yield. In 1528, Moscow received a large monetary indemnity as well as key strategic provinces, among them Riga, Smolensk, Polotsk, and others, territories destined to play a crucial role in the country's future advance westward. The triumphant end of the war and the establishment of control over Smolensk and Polotsk allowed Ivan to proclaim a new state, Russia, the home of all the Eastern Slavic peoples, and more besides. That same year, the Tsar set the course for the future policy towards the peasantry across the vast lands of the new state. Russia, he declared, was to be a nation of free peoples, where every man could shape his own destiny as he saw fit. From that moment onward, all peasants were granted the right to move freely and could not longer be bound to the land. Another key reform was the abolition of the system of местничество, hereditary precedence in state appointments, which greatly accelerated the country's modernization. These changes, though urgently needed and undeniably beneficial, were met with fierce resistance from the Russian boyars. But the great Tsar would tolerate no such defiance. He crushed the rebellion in blood. With the reforms settled, Russia turned its focus to rebuilding the economy after the long and grueling war. In 1529, the first colonization expeditions were dispatched beyond the Ural Mountains, marking the beginning of the great colonization of Siberia. Several years later, in 1536, the Tsar decreed that the capital of the realm be moved from Moscow to the newly founded city of St. Petersburg, named in honor of the Apostle St. Peter. The new capital was meant to stand as a symbol of Russia's prosperity and might. That same year, having restored his strength, the Tsar once again marched against the Great Horde. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Uzbek Khanate stepped in to defend the Horde, but neither posed a serious obstacle. The Uzbeks were far too backward in tech, and the Commonwealth was weakened and bled dry by the previous war. By 1537, almost the entire territory of the Uzbek Khanate laid under Russian control, and by 1540 the main armies of the Commonwealth had been crushed. By then, most of its lands were occupied. Recognizing the futility of further resistance, the Polish king capitulated once again in 1541. Barely a month later, the Uzbek Khanate too ceded its northern provinces to the Tsar, definitely opening the way for Russian expansion into Siberia and the Far East. Nothing now stood in Russia's path in that vast region. In April 1542, the Great Horde itself surrendered. This final campaign of the Great Tsar proved a resounding success, opening new horizons for conquest across Central Asia. Yet, every successful conquest demands reliable allies. In 1545, Russia sealed an alliance with the Sheikhdom of Ajam. The two nations were united by the shared grievances against a common neighbor, the Mughal Empire. In 1550, together with Ajam, Russia launched a campaign to conquer the territories of Central Asia. The cutting-edge European weapon of the Tsar's infantry, muskets, gave the enemy warriors still fighting with spears and swords no chance at all. By 1555, the war ended with the complete capitulation of the Mughal Empire. Russia's new provinces opened even broader horizons for expansion towards the distant Far East. In 1556, a menace to all Europe, the Ottoman Empire fell upon the weakened Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Tsar could not stand aside. Russia immediately entered the war. Its goal was to seize as many provinces along the Black Sea and in central Ukraine as possible, before the Turks could take them. Needless to say, Poland was in no condition to mount serious resistance. The campaign went well, but in 1558 the tragedy struck. Ivan IV, the unifier of the Russian lands, died. His son, Ivan V, took the throne, vowing not to tarnish his father's honor and to finish the wars begun in Russia's interest. Before signing any treaty with the Commonwealth, however, Ivan V chose to launch a swift and victorious campaign into Karelia and Finland, which had recently broken away from Sweden amid unending civil strife. These expeditions proved hugely successful. The young states offered almost no resistance. By 1562, both kingdoms were fully incorporated into Russia. Riding this wave of triumph, the Tsar resolved to bring the remaining fragments of the old Novgorod Principality back into the Russian fold and to strike at Lapland. In 1563, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth finally capitulated, ceding to Russia the provinces of central Ukraine, including Kiev itself, as well as granting access to the Black Sea. That same year, Lapland too surrendered, returning the last remnants of Novgorod's territories to Russia. Historical justice was at last restored. The conquest of Kiev marked the dawn of a new era in Russian history. At long last, Kiev, the ancient capital of Kievan Rus and the mother of Russian cities, was free from foreign rule. Russia's foothold on the Black Sea coast, though recently won, remained fragile. The Tsar saw the looming danger from the Ottoman Empire all too clearly. The Genoese colony at Azov was a tempting prize for the Turks, and so in 1564 the Great Tsar gave the order to begin the siege of Azov, determined to bring the settlement swiftly under Russian rule. The siege itself was brief, yet the official treaty was not signed until 1568. That same year, the Tsar resolved to settle once and for all the matter of the waning Uzbek Khanate and the Great Horde. This war promised no great difficulties, until in 1569 the Turks at last revealed their true intent. They issued an ultimatum demanding that the recently annexed province of Kherson be ceded to the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan knew full well that the Tsar's main forces were then engaged in the campaigns against the Uzbeks and the Great Horde. The Great Tsar delayed his final reply, but after 2 months he answered with a resolute refusal. Russia's faithful allies Denmark and Aegean entered the war at her side. A long and bitter conflict had begun. The Tsar ordered the bulk of his army to march to the southwest, leaving only a small force to finish the campaigns in the east. For 2 years, Russian armies withstood the Ottoman hosts with mixed fortunes. Yet this was enough time to force both the Uzbeks and the Great Horde to accept peace on terms advantageous to Russia. The empire's southern and eastern frontiers were now secure, and the full might of Russian arms could at last turn against the Turkish aggressor. Over the next 6 years, countless battles raged across the lands around the Black Sea. Neither side could win the decisive upper hand. But by 1577, Russia finally drove the Turks from Crimea, from the regions of central Ukraine, and from northern Romania and Bessarabia. Both sides bled white, could fight no longer. A treaty was signed. The entire Crimean Peninsula was passed to Russia, together with several other territories along the Black Sea coast and in central Ukraine. Russia had securely defended her interests on the Black Sea. Soon afterward, on the site of the former Genoese colony, a new port city arose at the mouth of the Don, Rostov-on-Don. This event marked the final consolidation of Russia's presence in the region. In the long struggle to free the Slavic brothers from the tyrannies of Asia and the Near East, the great Tsar Ivan V grew even more inspired by the ideals of a free society, a realm in which it is not the monarch but the citizens themselves who are the source of power. And so, in 1578, the Russian Tsardom was reformed into a republic. From that day forward, the nation's leader would be chosen for a limited term through free elections. The newborn Russian Republic and its citizens looked boldly to the future, toward an age of great deeds and still greater achievements. In 1585, the Russian Republic could no longer stand aside. It guaranteed the independence of the newly formed Serbian Principality. Born amid the endless wars of the Balkans, the last free stronghold of Orthodoxy on the peninsula. The spark of hope for freedom must never die in the hearts of our brothers, declared the Possadnik in a speech before the Duma. Thus, Serbia officially entered into alliance with Russia. At the same time, the colonization of Siberia was in full swing. Over the past 50 years, Russian settlers had pushed far to the east, reaching and even circling the shores of Lake Baikal. Yet the brave pioneers of Russia faced not only the vast wilderness, but also the dangers that lay within it. To ensure the safety of new settlements and secure access to the milder southern regions, the great Possadnik entrusted a rising commander, Yermak Timofeyevich, with a series of campaigns against the Asian states. These expeditions were highly successful, thanks not only to the superior European equipment of the Russian troops, but also to Yermak's extraordinary leadership and skill as a commander. Under his careful guidance, Russia finally reached the shores of the Pacific Ocean. A few years later, in 1601, the first maritime expedition was launched, opening before Russia horizons never seen before. For his valor, Yermak Timofeyevich was honored and placed in command of new campaigns in Central Asia against the Mughal Empire, the Uzbeks, and the remnants of the Great Horde. These conquests, too, were successful. In 1601 and 1603, Russia's borders expanded once more. The era of relative peace came to an end in 1604. Unable to endure the oppression of the brothers in faith, the great Possadnik once again took up arms, this time against the Ottoman Empire, alongside Russia's loyal allies Serbia and Asia. At first, during the initial 6 months, the Russian armies advanced almost unopposed, occupying southern Galicia, Bukovina, and Moldavia. But in 1605, the first major battle took place, one that set the tone for the entire war. The Russian army crushed the Turks utterly. The pattern held in every subsequent battle. Russia's technology and military genius left the enemy no chance. By 1607, well-equipped Aragonese corps arrived to aid the Ottomans, a troubling surprise for the Russians, but the numbers were too few to change the tide. In 1609, after suffering heavy losses and the total defeat of Ottoman forces near Tsaritsyn, Aragon withdrew from the war, signing a white peace, which the Possadnik readily accepted. Now nothing could alter the war's outcome. In early 1611, the Sultan signed a peace treaty. Russia gained the southwestern lands of Ukraine and southern Galicia. Serbia regained many of its national provinces, including Belgrade. It was a truly great victory for all Slavs, though it was clear that this would not be the last of such wars.